Welcome to Calvary Baptist Church, and normally right now I'd say welcome to worship. However, we have an announcement about that, and well, let's give you a bit of background first, and that is, if you remember a couple years ago when the pandemic hit, before the pandemic, we at Calvary were basically all in-person worship and no online worship. And it was like we had to flick a switch to all of a sudden be all online and nothing in person. And then eventually we're able to add in a bit of in-person worship again last fall. And when we did that, we kept these pre-recorded worship expressions going on YouTube. And then we also added live stream on Facebook, which meant that we kind of had three different things going on: live worship, live streaming, but also these in-person, these online worship expressions. And to be honest, it was getting to be a bit much. And these worship expressions do take a fair bit of editing and a little bit of fiddling online, shall we say, on the internet. So a decision has been made to try something for a few weeks. And what we're going to try is, first off, encouraging you to join us Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. right here for in-person worship. Now, realizing that's not going to be possible for everybody, because some of you, quite frankly, live at a distance, and others of you just don't feel ready yet to be back in church. We completely understand both, so no worries there. But therefore, we encourage you to join us 10 o'clock Sunday mornings on Facebook on our live stream. It's quite easy to get to. The best way to do it is just go to our website, calvarybaptistcoburg.com, and there you'll find a link to our Facebook page, and then it will pop up at 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, if 10 o'clock in the morning is not good for you, it is actually posted. It will be there for the rest of the day, in fact, the rest of the week, for the rest of whenever Facebook is around, probably. So no worries there. You'll be able to participate in worship at any time. So you're welcome to join us in that, and you don't have to have an account with Facebook, I'm told, to use that. So please try that and let me know how that goes. And does that mean that these worship expressions will no longer happen? There'll be nothing on YouTube? Well, we're still going to have something on YouTube. And one thing I did recognize with doing both in-person worship, live streaming, but also the worship expressions was I kind of liked the pre-recording of having a run-through of the sermon. So I thought I'd keep doing that, and I kind of figured if I'm doing that, I may as well do it in front of a camera. So this provides us with something on YouTube, which will be basically opening up the scriptures and thinking through the scriptures as we do Sunday by Sunday. And so I hope that maybe there's one or two or a few or some people that might appreciate that, and we hope to help people walk with Jesus in faith, hope, and love. And hopefully this is part of doing that. And so we're going to try that, at least for a few weeks, and see how that goes. So thank you for joining. And that being said, maybe you want to hit stop right now and go look us up on Facebook and to participate in the full worship with the singing and everything. So you're welcome to do that. I won't be offended if you press stop now. But otherwise, you're welcome to carry on with us right now as we open up the Bible and as we think through the scriptures and apply it to our lives. And so Reg Ward is going to read our scripture focus for us today. Thank you, Reg.
Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, left the Jordan and was led by the Holy Spirit into the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone." The devil led him up to a place and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world, and said to him, "I will give you all their authority and splendor. It has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. If you worship me, it will be all yours." Jesus answered, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." The devil led him to Jerusalem and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you carefully. They will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Jesus answered him, It is written, Do not put the Lord your God to the test. When the devil had finished all his tempting, he left him until an opportune time. This is the word of our Lord. Thanks be to God.
What is your greatest temptation? Or maybe we should say, what is your worst temptation? Or even when I just mention the word temptation, let's play word association here. What's the first thing that jumps into your mind as being a temptation? And so maybe it's something like, well, if you're like me and you're a motorcyclist, maybe it's going to be speeding. Maybe that's a temptation for you. No, it's not actually a temptation for me, but I'll tell you what is a temptation for me is snacks. I love to eat all day, every day, and all the time. So snacks, huge temptation for me. So maybe you can relate to that. Here's another one, sleeping in. Some people are tempted by sleeping in. Now that one's not a temptation for me because I know if I sleep in, I'm going to have to clean up after a wee doggy. I don't like doing that. So sleeping in not tempted by that. Maybe another temptation, well, everything's starting with S so far, so let's continue that. A second slice of pizza or a second helping of pizza, that might be a temptation for some people. Seconds of food, so there's another temptation. Or another S word, sex. And that can get us thinking about some of those really deep temptations that we face, temptations that are temptations to sexual sin, whether that be pornography or what have you. Temptations too that deal with addictions like gambling, drugs, alcohol. Pretty much anything can become an addiction, actually. So there's all kinds of temptations there that we could think about and talk about. But I'm imagine that as we're thinking about all these different temptations, I bet that none of you, oh, there's me falling to the temptation of betting, but anyway, I bet that none of you have thought of any temptation that looks like the temptations that Jesus faced. I don't think any of you probably thought, oh, I'm tempted to look at a stone and turn it into a loaf of bread. If I was going to turn it into anything, I would turn it into chocolate, of course, but I bet the temptations that Jesus faced, you probably didn't think of those. However, when we look at the temptations of Jesus, we're going to see that the three different temptations, there's actually one big temptation that stands behind all three of them. And that one big temptation is a terrible temptation that we face today in our lives, and it is so destructive. And what makes it an even worse temptation is that very often we're not even aware of it happening. We're aware of certain temptations. I know when I've got an open road in front of me and I'm tempted to speed, the temptation's there. I see a snack on the counter, I know the temptation's there. But sometimes we can be tempted with the same temptation that Jesus faced in the wilderness, and we don't even recognize it. We don't see it, and we fall victim to it. And others fall victim to our falling victim to it. So what is this great temptation that we all face and that Jesus faced? Well, let's look at our scripture and we'll see what it is and we'll see what to do about it. So let's turn to the temptation of Jesus here. And here's the first one. When Satan says to him, remember that Jesus has spent 40 days without food here, so obviously he'd be very hungry. And so Satan says to him, if you're the Son of God, command this stone to become a loaf of bread. There's the first temptation. The second one is, devil shows him all the kingdoms of the world and basically says, you can have power, you can have the authority over, I'll give that to all these kingdoms to you. Just bow down and worship me. And Jesus is like, nope. And every time here he quotes scripture when he says nope. And the third one, Satan takes him to the corner of the temple, and says, well, if you're really the Son of God, then just throw yourself down and God will take care of you, right? You will be fine. And Satan even quotes scripture to that effect, that he'll be fine. And again, Jesus responds, nope, not doing that. Again, quoting scripture back to Satan. So what is happening there, and what is common with these three temptations? Well, what is common between them is, well, for starters, they're all taking the easy way out. They're all moving away from what Jesus is called to do. When Satan says to him, turn this stone into a loaf of bread, well, yeah, Jesus being God the Son would have the power to do that, but that was not his calling. His calling was to live the kind of life where he would experience hunger, where he would experience suffering, where he would experience what we all can and sometimes do experience. But look at the second one, this idea of you can take the easy road out here. You can build an empire for yourself. You can build a kingdom by yourself. You have the power to subject all these people to your whim. You have the power to do that. But again, that's stepping beyond, outside of the calling of Jesus. That he's called, yes, to bring a kingdom. He's called to be the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. But it is not done through brute force and violence. Rather, it's to be done by the power of the cross, through the power of suffering. Not the suffering of all the people who must be kept in line in this kingdom, but rather his own suffering for the sake of all the people. And then the third one of throwing himself down, putting himself into harm's way and just expecting God to protect him. And again, the idea here is that that's stepping outside of his calling, that Jesus is called to experience suffering and not to avoid it. He's called to the path of the cross, that Jesus knows that that's in the future, that he will experience suffering, even suffering on the cross. And so what is the temptation here? It's the temptation basically to not pick up his cross. We'll get into that again in a moment, but let's think of how this temptation shows up again when Peter, and Jesus says to the disciples, who do people say that I am? And Peter is very astute. He says, you're the Messiah. And then Jesus goes on for the very first time to tell them, now, I'm going to be killed. I'm going to be put to death. And Jesus says to him, Peter says, took him aside and began to rebuke him. In other words, kind of saying, no, you don't have to do that. You're not going to die. That's not the way we're going to do this. But turning and looking at his disciples, it says here in Mark chapter 8, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. Get behind me, Satan. And here is Jesus basically saying to Peter, you're acting as just like Satan did back in the wilderness, trying to get me off course, trying to get me to not be on this path of the cross. But I'm on the path of the cross. That's my calling. That's what I'm to do. And so don't tempt me off this course. Don't say to me that I don't have to do this because it's what I'm doing. And so here's Jesus faces that temptation again. And of course we hear Jesus facing that temptation again in the Garden of Gethsemane. Just imagine how in those moments that must have felt to have all the forces of evil basically arrayed against him, and that he knows what's coming up. He knows that the cross is before him, that he's going to be executed, crucified. And so he says, Father, if it's possible, let this cup be taken from me, this suffering. And we just know that Jesus would know there'd be a different way. There would be a different way. He didn't have to suffer. He could have called 10,000 angels to wipe everybody out. He could have gone back and done it the way Satan would have done it, with brute force, with power, with violence, against those who were doing violence to him. But that was not the calling of Jesus. The calling of Jesus was to suffer, to take the path of the cross, to go to the cross and to suffer, because that's the way of love. God came to us. We put him to death. Such violence against him, and yet he continued to love us anyway and offered forgiveness, offered grace and mercy. That's love. That's an expression of love. And that's how we're made right with God the Father. Isn't through our ability to impress God in any way, but rather the fact that God, his love is impressive. It's through his grace that we are made right with God, that our sins are forgiven. It's because of his desire to forgive us, rather than our ability to earn that forgiveness. We never could. Now, when Peter says, when he rebukes Jesus, saying, you don't have to go the way of the cross, and Jesus rebukes him and says, get behind me, Satan, Jesus goes on immediately to say something else. And that is, he calls the crowd, the disciples, and said to them, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. In other words, Jesus is leading the way. Pick up your cross and follow me. In other words, Jesus has already picked up the cross and he's showing the way of love. So the temptation, the greatest temptation of Jesus was to stop loving, to put down the cross and pick up a sword and just wipe everybody out. But that's not his way. His way was not the way of the sword, but the way of the cross. And so our greatest temptation, well, you know what it's going to be. Our greatest temptation is to not pick up our cross. Or some days it's to put down that cross that we had picked up. Some days we put it down and we want to pick up a sword. But that's not the way of Jesus. We're called to pick up our cross and follow him. And as we think of these temptations that we all face, they all come back to love. When we think of, it all goes right back to Adam and Eve. When we think of Adam and Eve and how they sinned in the Garden of Eden, it wasn't just that the apple looked good. In fact, we don't know that it was an apple, by the way. That's just tradition. We don't know what fruit it was. But they weren't supposed to eat it. This one fruit they're not supposed to eat, and they did. It's not just about that fruit and how good it looked, how tempting it was. But rather, it's what was happening between the love relationship between God and Adam and Eve that they would be in that situation of being tempted by that fruit. What was happening in that relationship? How had their love relationship broken down there? We can see the temptation too of Cain to kill his brother Abel. That temptation began with, again, a breakdown in love. We can think of when Cain put Abel to death, it wasn't just about the temptation to break the commandment, thou shalt not murder. In fact, the 10 commandments weren't even given yet. Cain didn't have that commandment, but rather because Abel was created in the image of God, Cain ought not to have brought violence against him. But also because Cain was created in the image of God, Cain ought not to have brought violence against his brother Abel. Because when we're created in the image of God, that means so many different things, but part of it is that we are created with the capacity for love. And Cain was not showing that capacity for love when he killed his brother. So it's not just about breaking a rule there. It's about how the image of God really was not present there in Cain at that moment. That something had broken down in his love, his capacity to love, and his love relationship with his brother. And we can read right through the Old Testament and see that time and time again, there are times that God's people will wander away and rebel against God. It's not just about them breaking rules. It's about what's happening with their love relationship with God. And of course, it's about the love relationship breaking down when God comes to us and there he is, and being mocked and scorned and being sent off for execution, to be killed, to be crucified. There's a real breakdown in love there on our part, and yet there's a real breakthrough in love there on God's part, that he showed the way of the cross, the way of love, the way of not putting down a cross to pick up a sword, but rather the way of love. And the love relationships, they break down even looking at sins today. We can think of the example of when one strong ruler in the world wants to take his army and invade another nation. Where is the love in that? Where is the love for the people of that other nation? And also, where is the love even for that ruler for his own people, when so many of his own soldiers are going to be put in harm's way and so many are going to die and be injured? Where's his love for his own people when so many mothers and wives and husbands and so many people are going to lose loved ones? Where's the love? We're not looking in our world right now at some temptation to build an empire. That's not where it begins. The temptation begins with putting down the cross and picking up a sword. The temptation to not love, the temptation to stop loving. We're seeing that in our day being played out on the world stage. But are we seeing that in our day, in our own lives? Are we facing that today? Are we being tempted? And we can think of all kinds of temptations that we might face. But do they come back to this significant temptation, this very important temptation to stop loving, to not love, to put down our cross, to not pick up the cross, to put down the cross and pick up a sword sometimes? Are we facing these kinds of temptations? And it comes back to love. Sometimes it's a matter of where is our love relationship with other people when we're tempted to do harm towards them. Again, it's not just a temptation to do harm, it's a temptation also to not love first. Or sometimes it's temptations to do things that are self-harming, things like getting into those things that we'll become addicted to. Very often they begin in a place of self-hatred, of lack of love for ourselves, and so we don't take care of ourselves. Also the temptation to do what we do to this world, out of a lack of love for our environment and our world. Very often the temptations that we face, it comes back to this great temptation that Jesus faced in the wilderness to stop loving, to not love. You know, sometimes we miss the mark, and that's what the word sin literally means, and one of the ways that it means, it's missing the mark, like a bow and arrow, and you miss the bullseye. And often we think of that in terms of what rule did we break, you know, to sin, and we missed the mark, breaking that rule. It's much deeper than that. Again, it's missing the mark when God is love, and we are created in His image. How do we miss the mark when we are not a people of love? But there's good news. Yes, we missed the mark. Jesus did not miss the mark. He was tempted, but He did not sin. He would have been tempted. The greatest temptation is to not go the path of the cross, but He went to the cross for our forgiveness. There's a wonderful passage of Scripture that speaks to this. It's in Philippians chapter 2, which says, "Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though He was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited." In other words, He didn't regard His position as God so that He could, turn that stone into bread. Take all those kingdoms by force. And yes, jump from the temple and not be harmed. He did not exploit His position and His power as God. So He did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied Himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness and being found in human form. He humbled Himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. That's Jesus. He did not miss the mark. But there we have the image of God on full display, the love of God. And God is going to help us. We have the Holy Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit, the very first one that's listed in Galatians 5, there's the fruit of the Spirit is love. God's going to help us with that. As we grow in our relationship with Him, God is going to help us with that. So are you facing temptations, or what is your greatest temptations? Well, of course you're facing temptations. We all do. And you're going to face temptations this week, and you're going to face probably this week the temptations, the big temptation to stop loving or to not love. You're going to face the temptation to not pick up your cross. You're going to face the temptation to put your cross down and maybe even pick up a sword. We're all going to face these temptations. But what are you going to do with them? Are we going to go to Christ? Are we going to go to the Holy Spirit? Are we going to go to prayer and say, Lord, help us to reflect the love of Christ in our world. Help us to pick up our cross and follow You. Amen. Now, this is not a worship service, so I'm not going to lead you in a congregational prayer like I normally would, but I'm going to just encourage you to pray. And as you're praying, I want to I encourage you to pray about the temptations that you're going to face this week. The kinds of temptations that you normally face, maybe do some prayerful reflection on, is love really at the root of those? Does it somehow go back to lack of love for someone? Or does it go back to lack of love for yourself? Or lack of love for God? Lack of love for the world? Maybe to do that, but also to be prayerful of the fruit of the Spirit, praying that this week especially, the Lord would open your eyes to see when you're tempted to not love, to stop loving, to not pick up your cross. So I encourage you to be in prayer about that, and thank you for joining me.